Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, December. Yes, that's all. That's really all I need to tell you. It's Monday, December 28th, 2020. Time for another show, time for another week. It's week 206 of the Presidential Apprentice, in case you're still counting. We are down to nearly the end, and Trump is getting as frantic as you might expect him to be at the end of his lifeline here. Lots to catch up on. Crazy weekend. He didn't do too much. He got a chance to go and play golf, so that usually keeps him kind of quiet. But as you know, he thinks he's fighting for his political life at the moment, and that is not actually, what's happening. So that adds an interesting twist to everything. His term coming to an end, the government funding over the weekend coming to an end, or at least appearing to come to an end, and we got a wild procedural situation to go over there. At least in some cases, government programs did end. The extended unemployment benefits during the COVID pandemic did, in fact, shut down on Saturday. The word from the president's playpen in Florida is that he did sign the omnibus legislation that included the $600 COVID relief checks and a few other measures as well. Of course, omnibus bill meant there was an awful lot going on in it, but I think we have adequately explained it. But we'll recap things in case you missed it last week in our discussion with Greg. I'm sure we'll go over all the various complications. So, yes, the extended unemployment benefits will be renewed, but apparently because they lapsed on Saturday, that causes all sorts of administrative headaches that might result in people's checks being delayed, and they can ill afford it, of course, if they are depending on those checks. And of course they are. It's just one of those logistical things that once the expiration comes about and people who have been in the system up to this point find their eligibility technically cut off, they are perhaps in some cases, in some states, purged from the system by the automated the automated uninsurance bots that don't know the difference between a 12 o'clock midnight deadline that might be extended later on with the signature of a bill, allegedly, in Florida by an idiot who says he might be president, and might be president for life, and it doesn't really take that into account. And restarting it and having people have to refile their paperwork, one, when they're in the middle of a job search, two, when they're in the middle of a job search in a pandemic, three, when it's already a nightmare to fill out that paperwork when everything's going well. You can see where this might be going for some folks. Anyway, as for the question of whether or not the $600 checks will be magically turned into $2,000 checks, nothing is magical, of course, and it requires another vote in Congress. Last week we were busy explaining to everyone why there was a unanimous consent request made to do that on Thursday, even though they knew that it would be objected to and therefore wouldn't work, but you try anything you can anyway. And that was the fastest method of even raising the possibility that the bizarre last-minute videotaped speech disseminated on social media by the alleged president claiming to support $2,000 checks over $600 checks might actually work. You never know. Of course, they got what they wanted out of it. They said, your Republican president requests this thing be done. We likewise will agree that this thing should be done. How about you, Republicans in the House of Representatives? And the answer was no. And it may yet be no. Today is Monday, the first opportunity that has arisen to bring this measure to the floor under at least some semblance of regular order, but not quite. We'll explain exactly how that could be. It occurs to me now that I didn't do any testing of the Skype system, and I wonder if I can still do that in order to make sure that Greg's call comes through smoothly. I probably could do that, but it would be very disruptive. You'd all have to listen to me calling Skype call testing service. And, though that's not terrible, we could probably take care of it. Now that'll be on my mind. And if I don't do it, that's going to ruin everything. Oh, never mind. How about this? Greg Dworkin will call me, and that's an adequate test, I think. If we just pick up the phone, everything will work.
It's bad.
Except for this part.
We need an extra 25%.
When our own voice comes through on the line. All right, Greg, how you doing? Are you there?
I'm there. I thought I'd just give you your Skype test.
Great. Okay, that did it. It's certainly more exciting to hear that than to hear the.
Do not try this at home, folks. We are like total thorough professionals.
That's right. I was paid to do this by George Soros, and okay. Anyway, that works just as well as the Skype call testing service. So you get the pleasant British accented lady. Gets to come through, but you got to be careful with people with accents. This is my major takeaway from the weekend is people who say they have accents might not really have them or something. I think the biggest news in the world was maybe Alec Baldwin's wife isn't from Spain. I don't know why that happened. But
I don't know. I didn't pay attention to that. I will tell you that I certainly know that I don't have an accent. It's just that everybody else does.
Right. You're all crazy. You don't talk right. I agree. So many things to catch up on. We'll do the parliamentary procedure, and I know that your roundup will make mention of the fact that, hey, a giant bomb went off in Nashville, Tennessee on Christmas, and telecommunications.
Yep, we'll cover that. We'll cover the pandemic, but let's talk about what's going on and the craziness that's going on with Trump and stuff, and we'll hit that procedure. Okay. But let me start with Jake Sherman's playbook. And one of the things that happens when you lose an election is that all of a sudden the courtiers start covering you differently. Instead of, this is 11D dimensional chess that Trump is playing, and of course, look how he gets everybody to pay attention to him, and he's got media eating out of his hand. That's what we heard for 3 years.
He doesn't let anybody eat out of his hand.
And, got very sick of it. Today, playbook, Trump got nothing. That's it. President Trump made all this noise about the COVID relief and government funding bill only to sign it and get nothing in return. Trump got taken to the cleaners. I just wish they had covered this in the beginning. We've been ranting about this for a month, at least I have. What a bizarre, embarrassing episode, Jake Sherman writes. He opposed a bill his administration negotiated. He had no discernible strategy, no hand to play, and it showed. He folded, got nothing besides a few days of attention and chaos. Zip, zero, zilch. If he was going to give up this easy, he should have just kept quiet and signed the bill. It would have been less embarrassing. And in a statement, Trump said Congress will review Section 30, a red line bill he'll have. He'll never get the spending rescissions he's asking for, like zero chance. We know that because the Democrats control the House Appropriations Committee, for example.
Yeah, it's a hard thing.
They will review voter fraud. Sure thing, boss. And the Senate will begin the process of voting on $2,000 checks. Great. He'll split the Republican Party on the way out the door. And, of course, right before that Georgia election.
Yes, and don't let the door hit you where Donald Trump splits you to the Republican.
They'll be laughing, says Jake Sherman, or at least scratching their heads at your genius about this one for a while, Mr. President. Now, everything about Trump, everything that was written there has been true for 4 years.
Yeah.
It's just remarkable that they're finally just flat out saying it.
Yeah. That's true. It is remarkable. You're right. That's just kind of the way it goes in the courtier game. Those things have been true about Donald Trump forever, and I have a great thread to share at some point about that. But it was easy to see, and anyone could have told you. But that's the trappings of the presidency. Of course, he's a great deal maker. He's the president. He's made the ultimate deal.
He folds like a cheap card table. And he winds up signing this bill. And yet, as you were pointing out, there's still stuff happening today, Monday, in Congress, especially the House. For one thing, there's a $2,000 check for Americans to be voted on, which Democrats are all in on. In fact, they had the original idea for this, which Trump stole, and we're happy that he did. And hopefully everybody goes along with it, but of course they won't. And for reasons that are parliamentary, it's being brought up as a suspend the rules vote.
Right. Hate the rules.
Which means that you need 2/3 to pass it, which means Republicans will block it.
Yeah.
And so my question to you is, why are they doing it that way?
It's a good question. So we'll get to that later. Just kidding. It's a weird thing.
Is there a rule that says you have to discuss a bill for like 4.5 weeks before you can vote on it?
No.
Is that what they're suspending?
No. Okay. Well, suspension of the rules is, I mean, there's a kind of a justification for doing this. I don't know if I love it, but David Dayen actually was advocating for it last week, so he'll be happy to see that they're taking his suggestion up, and he's backed up his suggestion with a decent reason. So I'll explain it to you his way. Really, I mean, it makes sense. I'm going to just say that. Okay, but suspension of the rules is a faster procedure than regular order. That is, bringing a bill to the floor under a rule. Every bill in the House, we've been over this a couple times, but it always bears repeating. Every time a bill comes to the floor for consideration in the House, normally it comes with a rule ahead of time. They debate it for an hour, and it sets up the rules for debate of the bill. How long will they debate the bill? You know, the Senate can go on forever. The House says, we're going to debate this thing for 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, and split the time this way. These amendments are in order.
Everybody gets a nanosecond.
Yes, right. However they do it, they can do it. And all sorts of crazy things can go on with the rules. But the basic rule will say, how long will we debate? Who will control the time? And what amendments will be allowed to be debated? and that's that. With suspension of the rules, well, you suspend the rule that says you need one of those rules. And instead, you get a expedited procedure. There is 40 minutes of debate. Normally, if you bring a bill to the floor and you don't pass a rule for it, you can do things that way. Then the default rule plays. Every bill otherwise that doesn't get a special rule works under the standing rules, which is 1 hour of debate, evenly divided between, pro and con, and typically here it means by party. So half an hour of debate and then a vote, and amendments can go on forever, and anybody can offer amendments. And you don't know how long, as long the regular debate time is just an hour, but amendments can take you forever. Like the vote-a-rama in the Senate when they do the budget, it works like that. So that's a big headache for the House. Usually they pass a special rule instead. Suspension of the rules means you don't need to come up with a rule for debating it, but there are still strict controls on how long the debate goes. It goes for 40 minutes, less than an hour. Divided equally, 20 minutes aside, and the question of amendments is settled without any fight and without any vote. No amendments are allowed. 40 minutes, no amendments. They use it for simple stuff, usually for non-controversial stuff. In exchange for that expedited procedure, you don't have to go to the Rules Committee, you don't have to wait a day, you don't have to decide about amendments. In exchange for that ease of passage, they make it harder just to smooth things out, even out the odds. You got to have a 2/3 vote to suspend the rules and pass the bill this way. So, again, if you're naming a post office, great way to do it. If you have a contentious issue like these $2,000 checks, well, not so much. But so ordinarily you would say, hey, this...
It'd be nice to see impeachment go that route, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, to go that quickly. And I guess you could try that, but not with... I don't know if you can
If
do
he
it
pulls anything else in the past 2 weeks, they may have to.
I guess so. Anyway, yeah, so the downside is that you need 2/3 vote, and most people would probably guess, and I think you'd be correct, that there'd be enough Republicans to say no to that you'd screw it up, and so why would you want to do that? Just as people were complaining about doing it by unanimous consent, it takes just one to object. Here it takes more to object, but they'll be able to find those numbers.
Well, and so however they do it, they'll pass it. And the question's going to be what the Senate does. And, of course, everybody's expecting the Senate to say no. And now that the bill is signed, who cares, says the Senate. It's just that there's an election next week in Georgia that they do care about. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle that. And then there's the second thing that'll come up, which is the veto override of the Defense Act. And so there's a lot of stuff to do today. It's going to be interesting.
Last thing I'll say about the suspension of the rules thing. David Dayen's theory here was, well, okay, you have the weird situation, remember, that of the Republican president saying, I want the $2,000 checks. So whether you hold the vote by regular order or by suspension of the rules, you set up Republicans. They either have to say, I love hurting people so much that I just have to do it, even though the president is on record saying, I want you to do this other thing. I either have to split from the president to hurt more people or give in and thereby give the bill bipartisan support. If you pass the bill under regular order, only Democrats need to vote for the thing and all the Republicans can run away. But if you do it by suspension of the rules, you get to hang the failure more clearly on more Republicans. And there is another benefit. Just because a bill fails under suspension of the rules is not the end of it. You can turn around and say, all right, well, we'll make a rule for it and bring it back tomorrow. So you get another chance at it, even if it fails.
Right. So, that to me is esoteric stuff. In other words, if you know you're going to pass it, you do it one way. And if you know it's going to fail, then you try to get everybody on the record.
Yeah.
But they can pass it with just Democratic votes alone, so it's a pass bill, and I don't get the game of getting Republicans on the record because everybody knows right now how they feel about it. They've been watching.
There you might be relying on the speed with which you can get a vote. They wanted that vote happening as soon as possible. To get it on the floor Monday, suspension of the rules is really the only practical way. Otherwise, if you need a rule, remember, you have to stop at the Rules Committee. That means they'll meet tonight, consider amendments. Even if they throw out all amendments, the soonest you could see a vote would be tomorrow, and everybody wanted something on Monday. So if you want to vote on Monday, it's got to be suspension. Otherwise,
right. But that was contingent on him not signing the bill. I mean, the idea was to pretty it up so he'd sign it.
Yeah, I guess. Although, I don't know whether
none of it makes any sense. So you can pick and choose how you want to do it.
I think they were just going to amend what he signed.
Trump got pressured by Republicans to sign the damn thing, which he did, and folded like a cheap card table. And Jake Sherman is right; he got nothing for it, and
that
was
is
awful.
Definitely true.
And the only thing he did is he got everybody to pay attention to him for another couple of days. But when the attention's bad, I don't buy the idea that all attention is good. Whether it's bad publicity or good publicity.
Yes.
He looks awful. His party is split, and he's got elections where Perdue and Loeffler, and Perdue especially, has been running ads about how wonderful it was that he got this done. He, David Perdue, got all this done, which is pretty silly if anybody's actually paying attention. And if they're not paying attention to his ads either.
Yeah, well, that was his mistake, sure. I don't know. He's got that belief that all publicity is good. No one else believes
Georgia's
that.
the only thing that matters this week.
I guess so, and Trump doesn't care about that. So
politically,
that's odd.
Economically and real life, obviously, this bill matters, but it should have been signed a week ago. And there are people who are going to get screwed because of it, and folks will remember.
It is pretty dumb how
that's where things stand on that.
I think we probably have more.
We have this interesting tweet by Seth Kotler, who teaches American history.
I believe you.
At Willamette University.
That I don't know.
And he did some archive diving and found these interesting pieces from the New York Times, 1974 New York Times, where a reporter went to an almost entirely white upper-class retirement community in Orange County, California, to see what folks thought of the ongoing Nixon impeachment.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, are you sure this is 1974? But if it's Nixon,
Well, that's,
so they went to a diner and asked Trump
it'll
voters.
ring some bells. The news media is helping fan the flames of hatred for Nixon while concealing his accomplishments, said this one guy here, who likes to shore up his allegations with quotes from right-wing groups like the Liberty Lobby and the Christian Crusade. Remember those guys? He said the news media were controlled by a conspiracy of money manipulators and international bankers and big money changers who wanted to undermine America and its traditional values. And another man who recently wrote to the local Orange County Register, a newspaper with very conservative leanings, contended that only a military coup could now save the country from an attempt by the media to destroy the president.
Wow.
I mean, it just rings. You'll hear these same, again, I keep saying 24% of the public supported Nixon when he left. It's not surprising that they do for Trump. These notions have long had currency in Orange County, but the point worth noting in Leisure World, which attracts middle class to affluent whites from every state in the Union, it's kind of like the Villagers in Florida, is what appears to be a growing distrust of the news media throughout conservative circles. Everywhere, individuals talk darkly of the media's vendetta against the president and alleged there was a conspiracy between the media and Democratic politicians to oust Mr. Nixon. It's getting to be a witch hunt, one guy said, that tight look pulling at the edges of his mouth. The trouble with this whole thing is the president is being investigated by enemies who are more interested in getting him out than finding the truth. Henry Baudry, the president of the Republican Club in Leisure World, where GOP registration is more than 3 times higher than that of Democrats, said it was his impression that most Republicans there felt the case against the president had been prejudiced. Even the lowest citizen is given the right of innocence until he's proven guilty. Let's give the president the benefit of the doubt.
Okay.
Let's give the president the benefit of the doubt. I just remember that so clearly from Vietnam War days. Yeah. Whether it was John Wayne or Bob Hope or, whoever was up there talking about Nixon and why they supported him and yada, 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 and some things just don't change.
Was I thought the military coup reference was interesting. Was the military busy in 1974?
Yeah, they had stuff to do. So witch hunt and military coup, and, that's what happens. When the right-wing nutjobs lose, they always go back into the same hole, and somehow or other, they come out with the same dirt. It's just really weird, but that's how it works.
It did not require the invention of the internet to be that crazy.
Right, exactly. So, and you didn't need a conspiracy theory, and there was no Q. It just, everybody knew this.
Yes.
So, this is all, happening. Eric Boehlert has this nice piece in Press Run, his blog, how Beltway journalism is destroying our faith in government, both sides Olympics, by purposely misreporting on COVID-19 relief, which is what we were just talking about, that Democrats are trying to get past over the year-long objections of Republicans. The press is deliberately undermining Americans' faith in government and its ability to respond to a national crisis by pretending Congress is not able to function and that leaders or Washington are failing the country. The press not only gives radical Republicans political cover, the news coverage has spread a dangerous lie during a national health crisis.
That sounds bad.
Yeah, it is. In a stunning act of contempt, Trump secluded himself in Mar-a-Lago, refusing to sign a relief bill. While Mnuchin, by the way, was in Mexico at his resort hotel home. Right. And Ivanka and Jared fled Washington. Everybody ran away while this was happening.
Vail, skiing. Yeah.
Right. And Trump refused to sign the relief bill.
Right.
Trump says now act on it, and he did. Maybe. He signed it. But instead of telling the real story, the press constantly reported Congress was to blame.
Yes.
Americans, in response, say their faith in government has been shattered.
Yeah. And they even pushed back when people said it's not Congress, it's Republicans. There are reporters out there on Twitter saying, nuh-uh, it's both sides.
Yeah, it's always both sides, right? Yeah. So it's such bullshit.
Yes.
They have good quotes here. I've worked for 18 years at a diner under very hard conditions. I never called in sick except when my husband died, and now Congress is just leaving town. It makes me furious because they're leaving people hanging. That's a waitress quoted in the Washington Post. Wow. I wish they would put themselves in the shoes of us, the normal working people. Yeah. The White House, Congress, and everybody else making these decisions. And that's exactly what Trump wants, for Americans to question their longtime institutions and lose faith in government. But it isn't about the Trump administration. No. Right? The press is undermining the faith with both sides journalism. And he's got a great point, and he's absolutely right, and it's infuriating, and we see it all the time. Yeah.
Well, a lot of discussion about that over the weekend, and excellent. Always good. You can rely on Eric to recap these things.
But there should be pushback. I mean, the reporters just do it as a matter of course, and people need to get in their face. I get in Kelly O'Donnell's face all the time when she does that on cable news, and she very properly points out, she's very professional about it, that's good, and says, look, this is my assignment. Yeah. Don't blame the reporters. It's the goddamn editors. Oh, I guess that. Or producers, in the case of cable TV. Right. They're told to go and do this.
Do I want to credit that kind of a dodge? I guess so. It's probably true.
It is. It's the same people that write the headlines.
I can imagine any job. Well, not every job. Maybe Andrew Cuomo's job, or not, or Andrew, the other Andrew from New York, Giuliani. His job is not hard. Yeah, Andrew Cuomo's job is considerably hard.
He's got a hard job.
More so than sports coordinator.
He's Chris Cuomo's brother. That's tough.
Yes, I know. They have to deal with each other. Okay. Well, I didn't recognize the reporter who was making such a stink yesterday or over the weekend about how it was super important that everybody realized it really was Democrats' fault. And I'm being kind by not pointing at them. I'm saying it's both sides. It's a very unusual approach, but I imagine it's at the heart of a lot of the reporting. She should have availed herself of that excuse. It's not me, it's my editors. But what if I spend my weekend on Twitter saying it's me? Well, that's
people
should have
do
been
that.
both
it's
sides
like,
in it.
How dare the Democrats pass something that everybody wants and makes sense policy-wise because they know it can't pass in the Senate, therefore it's the Democrats' fault. That's the logic.
Right, yes. And it was very upsetting and annoying. And I mean, it was very weird to see them present that as such savvy analysis when it's in fact just, again, it's more simplistic analysis than the one they thought they were attacking. To say this one-dimensional view of the Senate, which is just this body that sits there and waits to be appeased by the House. There's no agency in the Senate. They can't file their own bills.
Well, it's also, the whole win and lose thing. It's all about whether you win this vote or lose this vote. It's got nothing to do with whether or not you're trying to do the right thing. Morality has nothing to do with it. Neither does need or emergencies or actual policy. It's all about winning and losing the vote.
Optics.
And reporters get really annoyed when people take them to task for that kind of shallow coverage.
Yeah.
And it's the same, mentality that says, look, the president said this, so I wrote it down. Why are you yelling at me?
Yeah.
Because you're a stenographer without context. That's why. Well, but he said that, and then the other side said that, and I accurately reported that, and my job is accuracy. No.
Yeah,
it's not
right.
actually. It's to explain to the American public what's going on, and being accurate in your quotes doesn't do it. If you if you take climate deniers and if you take the one scientist who says that no, this is really a big problem, and you give them equal coverage. No, if you take vaccine deniers and you take the scientists who are developing the vaccines and you give them equal coverage. No, yes, they're accurate quotes, but that's not the purpose of informing your public. You're not doing information. You're not doing context. It's terrible.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. We've got much to discuss here. Yes, a little bit of pandemic chatter in the background there. It doesn't necessarily have to be next,
we were talking about the vaccines, and so I think that's a good entryway into this. It's interesting because my doctor friends are starting to report that they're either on schedule to or have already gotten the vaccine.
Yes.
And whereas it appears to be a little bit of a disparity between who gets it and who doesn't get it.
Yes.
And that was a big deal at Stanford when the residents found themselves at the back of the line, but the senior radiologists who take call once a month and don't ever see patients got it first.
Stanford radiologists.
The thing is, if you're in the hospital, you're at risk. That's why, let's say, if a psychiatrist happens to be online to get the vaccine, you'd think, oh, well, why are psychiatrists getting it? Why aren't ER docs getting it first? But the fact is, when you're admitted to a psychiatric unit, you chances are have medical issues as well. Things aren't pure, and especially if you're older, you're going to have medical issues. And so psychiatrists, in fact, have to deal with medical issues all the time. And whether they do it themselves or whether they do it through medical consults doesn't really make any difference. And by the way, medical patients in a medical ward can have psychiatric issues. And so you can have the psychiatrist over there doing a consult. So the idea that psychiatry is just as an example, is somehow walled off from the rest of the world is crazy.
You can't
just
that's
not how it works.
Put the couch 6 feet away.
Yeah, so 6 feet distance on the couch. But the point is that if you're in the hospital, you need to get vaccinated. And so whether it's the dermatologist who goes first or whether it's the ER doc who goes first, it's actually more a function of your hospital system than it is ranking you in terms of, how deserving you are of getting it. So, if you're in the hospital system and you're active, then you're going to be online to get it.
Okay.
And that's fine. And in fact, people are starting to get that. And the public is noticing. And a lot of the docs are doing this very, very publicly. And so there's a trio of polls that are out from Kaiser Family Foundation, from Gallup, from Pew Research. And, they say things like, well, this is Kaiser Family Foundation. A critical question that's already begun to face policymakers is how to prioritize different groups and ensure equitable distribution of the vaccine. On this question, the public's confidence has increased markedly over the past several months, particularly among Black Americans. 2/3 of the public now say they are at least somewhat confident that when a COVID-19 vaccine becomes available, it will be distributed in a way that is fair, up from about half in September. Among Black Americans, the share is nearly doubled from 32 to 62%. Still, concerns remain. Half of Black adults say they're not confident that the development of a COVID-19 vaccine is taking the needs of Black people into account. Over a third of Hispanic adults say the same about the needs of Hispanic people. And this is a good reminder. When people look at, let's say, Black or Latinx populations, and say, gee, I wonder why they are so vaccine hesitant, the better approach, instead of questioning the population, is to question the institutions. Why are the institutions not, full of trust?
Oh, okay.
That's really the more important question there. So it turns out a large majority of the public is willing to do this. The share of people willing to get vaccinated is up to 71% in the Kaiser Foundation poll, up from 63% in September. This is one of the higher polls in terms of willingness, but Gallup says willingness to get COVID-19 vaccine ticks up to 63, and Pew is at 60 as confidence in research and development process increases. Still, about 2 in 10 pretty certain they won't get the vaccine, even when there's more information. And again, that is including a larger proportion of Republicans, but also a larger proportion of the Black population. So there's still a lot of work to be done. And that's why it's so important to note that with all the craziness that we talked about in the first half hour, in 23 days, Trump is out, and you can have somebody actually doing decent messaging that isn't going to be sabotaging everything people are trying to do. Okay. And that's, you can't overstate the importance of that. Yes, there's going to be the 23 to 25% in Orange County who still support Nixon and think it's a witch hunt and want a military coup to keep him in power. But, that's always been the case. There's always going to be that 25% of the country that are just, not so bonkers.
I guess so. And, the good news is I guess that's why your psychiatrists get the vaccine. You have to deal with those people. And these days, the 25% are highly likely to be infected because they're not wearing masks and don't believe in it.
Right. So this is from the New York Times trying to summarize all this stuff. Early vaccine doubters now show a willingness to roll up their sleeves. Now they do.
Like Marco Rubio.
Yeah, now they do. Oh, now you have a vaccine? Well, why don't I just go to the head of the line and just show people how important it is to get it?
Yes.
So there's this really great piece in the New Yorker, well worth reading, by Lawrence Wright, called The Plague Year, The Mistakes and the Struggles Behind America's Coronavirus Tragedy. They include not being allowed into China right away so that people could see that asymptomatic spread was possible, the screw-ups that Redfield made at the CDC over testing, and, of course, the mask fiasco with Trump, declaring that I wouldn't wear one. So a whole bunch of stuff went wrong here that could have been made right. Some of it wasn't our fault, but a lot of it was. And, unfortunately, too much of it is still ongoing. And with that, we look at the COVID numbers, and we had our Thanksgiving peak, and now starting to drop a little bit. Daily cases are starting to drop. The currently hospitalized, which lags behind that, is still up. The daily deaths are starting to drop. Yeah. But, of course, there's now going to be a Christmas, New Year's pre-surge. And so mid-January is still going to be pretty horrible.
I thought you were going to say maybe the reporting also is going to be a little screwy around the breaks as well when people.
Well, it's been sustained. That's why I didn't. Okay. I don't like to look at the daily numbers. I like to look at the weekly numbers.
Yeah.
But it's pretty clear that we hit our peak and a little bit below peak. It's still higher than it was, and it's still pretty bad. But again, it's like the Washington Post reporting or the other reporting that you were talking about in terms of insiders looking only at winning and losing. Yes. There's 1 million deaths. Well, now it's only 999,000. It's 3 less than so clearly it's better. Now we can move on to something else. No, it's really not how it works.
Yeah, I've been watching just day to day. But everybody's been pretty clear that you need to look at a rolling 7-day average. But the day to day, it seems pretty clear when there's a disruption for a major holiday and you start to see labs shutting down and reporting not coming through, and entire states simply taking the weekend off. So definitely take the day to day numbers with a large grain of salt. In fact, take it with 6 other day to day numbers, and then you'll be better off.
My friend Jill Lawrence had a nice column this morning in USA Today. She's the editorial page editor, by the way. Okay. Not the editorial page, but the opinions page editor.
That's not the person we're supposed to blame.
She works on getting she works on the editorial page, but she works on getting all these nice opinions into the USA Today. So it's had a major upgrade in terms of their opinion section. Yeah. I mean, I'm old enough to remember where the only opinion was like Richard DiBenedetto, and all he talked about was how bad liberals are. And that was like the only column that would ever be there. Okay. Now there's great pieces. There's 5 or 6 almost every day. But this is her own. And it's titled Waiting for Joe Biden, How to Make It Through the Final Awful Days of Donald Trump. Marie Antoinette had nothing on Trump, who flew to Florida and hit the links after pardoning cronies and upending a desperately needed COVID relief deal. Everything else has been going on so much we almost forgot about those horrible pardons and the ones that are to come. Next week is January 5th and 6th. 5th being the runoff in Georgia, and 6th being the long day in Washington, where the electors actually formally vote, or whatever it is that they do, or submit their votes.
Yes, they're counted.
They're counted. And so then Biden is super duper official as the president-elect, which makes the following 2 weeks the most dangerous in the entire Trump administration.
Yes, I just saw
because he's going to go nuts.
Sign go by.
And he's already nuts, and so he's going to be totally unhinged and worried about what happens at that point.
Yes. I just saw a photo of a sign, one of those outdoor advertising outside of a store. Is anyone else concerned about the season finale of 2020?
Yeah, exactly right. So Waiting for Joe Biden, How to Make It Through the Final Awful Days of Donald Trump. It's a good title. It's a good concept because, we got 3 weeks left. And the end of it's going to be some of the worst. Most of America likely is not surprised by President Donald Trump's post-election descent into ever deeper chaos, negligence, and callous self-absorption, but that won't make it any easier to get through the next 3 weeks and change. So the anxiety of bracing for what will happen next is ever present, and when it does happen, it's always a blow, it's always a shock, and it's not because we haven't been paying attention. So the pardons, the clemency, the talk about the coups, counter coups, and all that sort of stuff is all important. But truth and competence is on the way, and just keeping that in mind, I think, is really, really a big help. Yeah. So let's turn to Nashville. We don't know everything about Nashville, but we know the downtown Nashville explosion, according to the Tennessean, isn't being called terrorism yet, and here's why. The FBI on Sunday declined to classify the Christmas morning bomb explosion attributed to Anthony Warner, who blew himself up as part of the deal, as an act of terrorism, saying authorities didn't yet have enough evidence to determine a motive. The explosion detonated around 6:30 a.m. The explanation hasn't detonated yet. It killed Werner, injured 3 others, and destroyed or damaged more than 40 downtown businesses. Although investigators believe Werner worked alone, questions surrounding his motive remain. Doug Korneski, the FBI special agent in charge of the Memphis field office, said authorities were looking at any and all possible motives, and when asked whether this would be considered terrorism, he said they hadn't tied his motivation to ideology, which must be done for for the FBI to consider it terrorism. The act of violence must be committed in an attempt to further a political or social belief. So they're still working on it. And that's why they haven't declared it terrorism.
A
I
bomb
mean, we know a
has
lot
blown
about
up.
Warner now. He's a loner.
Yeah, right, sure.
He's
There's no...
absolutely, positively unusual in regard to his behavior to others.
Okay.
But that's all we know.
Okay. That is it's interesting to hear from their perspective. Well, this is what we need in order to define it as terrorism. But I think probably a bomb in the middle of downtown is pretty terrifying, and a lot of people are pretty sure that it was terrorism. And it's interesting that they have to feel like they tie it to somebody else's ideology. You can't just have the ideology of, my ideology is being a loner and blowing stuff up is good. All right, that's a terrible ideology. Now you're a terrorist. You're the only one who believes that, but okay.
Well, was the Unabomber a terrorist? Well, he had a manifesto.
Sure. Yeah, I guess that's it, right? So,
right. If you have a manifesto, then you can say, okay, fine. Right. What if you just have a 75-page letter? Well, it's not a manifesto. It didn't say manifesto.
It doesn't say. That's right. This says memo, and there's no such thing as a memo-festo.
Exactly.
So, sorry, you lose. It's just, okay. I mean, whatever. I guess take your time. Everybody else had their own opinions about it, and I think it'll be difficult to persuade me that they're wrong. That the real answer for why you didn't hear anything from Trump and why they're hesitant to call it terrorism came out when they published a picture of the suspect, and everybody said, "Oh, I can see now why it's quote unquote maybe not terrorism just yet," and also no word from the president. It's a skin tone issue for the president, certainly. FBI might be doing, I don't know. This seems to happen every time it is a white person behind the attack, so it's consistent. I don't know if the policy is a great one, but they aren't varying it based on race. It seems like the policy is, hey, no manifesto plus, arguably is being a loner enough of an ideology. I guess it's good enough for the libertarians, but...
Right. It said at the top, thoughts I've jotted down. And so since he's jotted these things down, even though he's talking about blowing people up because they don't believe what he believes, it's hard to call it a manifesto. And without a manifesto, I don't know that we can call it terrorism. Well, we'll have to wait on that for a new administration.
It just says here from the desk of something. It doesn't say from the manifesto.
And it didn't say Antifa. It looked like 5 times.
So that's easy to spot, though. Yeah, right. The picture, he was not wearing black. So... it can't be that. I don't know. It's a very weird situation. All right, so next week it's terrorism, but last week was when you blew up. So eventually it all comes out in the wash.
Right.
No.
So we shall see. And then finally, and I don't have any specific articles on this, but just some observations. It's, we're talking about COVID and we're talking about spikes, and they happen because of the holidays.
Protein spikes or just any spikes?
It's difficult.
Carbohydrates.
Really difficult to ask Americans to do something they don't want to do, expect them to do it. You're never going to get 100% compliance. There's always going to be people, not because they're bad people or because their motives are wrong. It's very easy to judge them. But let's say for the sake of argument, you have somebody in the family who's, 70 years old, 75, and they have cancer. Mm-hmm. And you want to get together for the holidays because you figure it's the last time you're ever going to see them.
That's where.
And are you going to yell at them that you can't get, together for the holidays because Tony Fauci told you not to? I mean, it's not how that works. People aren't like that. So there's always going to be people who have reasons, and they may be very good reasons for why they feel like, in this particular case, we'll take precautions. I'll get tested. I'll quarantine after, but I'm getting together for the holiday. Yeah. And so millions of people, are doing this. Maybe they don't all have the same good reason. But they have reasons, and to them it's good. And so the idea of stepping back and saying, okay, well, you people getting together are wrong. You people getting together, okay, I'll give you a pass. It's just a weird way of thinking about this. The idea is, though, that when you're talking about a country of 330 million plus, what you're trying to do is get some percentage of them. If you really don't have to, don't. But it's not like, okay, you all have to stop.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. The other thing that's, of interest is when you look at the people who refuse to get vaccinated, we've talked about vaccine hesitancy in the minority communities.
Yes.
But about 30% of hospital workers are always vaccine hesitant. I know that from working in my own hospital to bring our numbers up to above 95%. And it took a great deal of persuasion. We decided to do the persuasion route and not the enforcement route because we thought it would be more effective. We have people who are still going to be vaccine hesitant who are essential workers, 30% who are vaccine hesitant. So there's folks who feel like they have to work, who have to put food on the table, who will lose everything if they don't go to work. They still may be vaccine hesitant for various and sundry reasons. But the idea that everybody who's like allowed to be first in line or entitled to be first in line are therefore going to get the vaccine also isn't true. Again, people are complicated, and these situations are moving targets and complicated and complex. So the idea that all you have to do is tell people what to do and then they'll do it was never true. It's certainly not true now. And again, you've heard me rant on this for a long time. The worst person in the world to tell you what to do is politicians. Sometimes it has to be the politicians because they've already put out the wrong message and they are the ones that are obligated to correct it, as in Trump's case. But usually what you want is the politicians to say, I've appointed somebody really good at public health and let me step off the stage and let them explain to you why it's so important, and let me step back on stage when they're done and tell you I back them 100%. That's the job of the politician usually. In Trump's case, he has to say get the vaccine because he has to undo what he did.
Yeah. Well, he's got that obligation, certainly.
That's why I'm okay with him getting the vaccine if he gets at the front of the line.
I guess so. Yeah, there were definitely a couple of people who I wished, wouldn't get. There's some people I wish would just get COVID already and finish up, close the circle, but instead are getting the vaccine. Some of whom I see as making sense. There are others I don't, but then there's another explanation, continuity of government type explanation. But yeah, then there are some others that really infuriated me. But I guess the president, the guy who's nominally the president, will be for a couple of weeks. Although the continuity of government thing is starting to fall apart as an excuse. But I think everybody would have understood. The president of the United States gets it. But yeah, he's not. And he sent Mike Pence to get it instead. And that didn't convince anyone.
Yep.
That did the opposite.
Anyway, that's all I got for today.
All right.
It was so crazy. I think that we'll actually have an abbreviated crazy roundup for today and just let everything sink in.
Yeah.
And we'll have to see where we go from there. I'm sure we'll have a lot more to do on Wednesday.
Yeah, probably true. Right.
Stuff happens.
We'll have some idea of how today's vote goes down and what they're going to do about it, if anything is necessary to do about it. So by Wednesday might be the first opportunity to bring, if they have to bring the bill back under regular order, they might be able to rush it to Tuesday, in which case we'll have it to talk about on Wednesday. Otherwise, we'll be able to preview it. But yeah, by that point, we should have some idea of whether, I guess this is where we find out that it's, Charlie Brown and the football. I said I wanted $2,000 checks, but I changed my mind because I found out that they weren't for me.
Yeah,
that could happen still. Okay.
Or they weren't just for Republicans, which is what I demanded.
It might be what he demanded. Who knows? There's no way of telling. The only way, I haven't even seen this bill signed yet. I'm willing to assume that it's been signed because it'll start helping people. But it's another one of those situations where I haven't seen it. And they made a big deal. The reporters who were down at Mar-a-Lago for the weekend, I guess for the week, I guess they're never coming back, made mention of the fact that they prepared the small ballroom at Mar-a-Lago for this signing, which made me think, well, okay, so he's going to put on a show here, which is something he does all the time. And then word just came out he signed it. Like, what they prepared the ballroom for if nobody gets to see him sign? Now I'm suspicious, except I can't afford to say he did, to really believe he didn't sign it, because then the spice doesn't flow,
Yep.
So bad news.
There you have it.
Although, what can you do? All right, well, I got a theory about that too. We'll do all the theories next. Thanks, Greg.
Alrighty, take care, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.
Okay, that seems like
Thank you for the update in terms of policy and procedure. Oh, one last question about that since we started it. Let's end with it.
Yeah.
I also heard something about suspending the rule when you don't have enough people there.
Yes, that happens too. Suspension.
Like if you don't have enough people in Washington to do this, then you have to, do it under special circumstances.
That's a possibility too, right? If they don't have a quorum together, but they'll sometimes use suspensions bills. They very frequently will schedule them for Monday and Tuesday because they're travel days for people coming back from all over the country. And not everybody comes back anymore because they have the remote voting because of COVID, but you can handle them in various ways. But they are things that you can, if you're working under suspension of the rules and you get a voice vote on the thing and nobody asks for a recorded vote, you can just say, okay, the ayes have it, and everything goes just fine. You can do that with any bill, really, if no one asks for a recorded vote. But
with a contentious bill, that won't happen.
Yeah, or even when it's not contentious, but people want to be on the record. Even those stupid post office things, the local representative, I want a recorded vote. I want to win 400 and something to 10 for people who hate post offices voting against. So they very often will have these things and then hold the votes until later, but they'll do all the debate. And if there's nobody on hand, you can voice vote the things. So all sorts of extra possibilities. The suspension of the rules, like many of these weird tools, are just for keeping things flowing when you don't have everybody on hand and ready to work in regular order. They prefer regular order to everything, and suspensions is for easy stuff. So, or sometimes for special cases like this one.
Right. So thanks again for that, and talk to you on Wednesday.
I hope that made things clear. Okay, very good. And if it's not clear, it should be clear that he will be back on Wednesday, and we can do it again. Plus, of course, tomorrow being Tuesday, if all goes well, and I always wonder about this because especially around the holidays when staffing is tight, you never know what that might do in terms of affecting Joan McCarter's schedule, but seems like an exciting time to come in and check in with us. So my guess is that she'll be here and we can discuss this some more. But it's a weird thing, and we're going to be talking about this $2,000 check thing for a little while longer, and may not yet get them out of the Congress. I don't know. I mean, I guess if they stretch it out long enough, the Senate can keep discussing it and keep effectively teasing it and campaigning down in Georgia from or under the illusion that Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue will in fact be joining in a vote to extend $2,000 checks to everyone. And then, since they really actually hate helping people and want to keep all the money for themselves, they can eventually not vote those things out, dissolve the 116th Congress on January 3rd, still facing a majority of the voters possibly on January 5th, but with so many people voting early and Republicans encouraging all their people to vote early finally, it may not make much of a difference if on January 4th we find out, those checks didn't come. And then how long does it take to sink in with the remainder of the public who haven't yet voted early, which you could say is arguably the least connected to the day-to-day political news. They may very well go to the polls on January 5th fully confident that $2,000 checks have in fact been passed when they have not been, and that Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, who said they were for them in order to get reelected, were in fact against them and helped delay things long enough that the Congress dissolved and nothing was done. You never know. It could certainly happen that way. Anyway, about the suspension of the rules thing, I think I got that explanation all out there. The thing to keep in mind is, because you'll run into this, I mean, remember that last week, various sectors of all kinds, really, made a very big deal of the fact that unanimous consent would likely fail, to use that as evidence that that Pelosi's position ultimately was that she didn't want $2,000 checks to go out and really secretly did want $600 or maybe even nothing to go out. And if that wasn't the case, why would she choose to bring the bill up under unanimous consent when she knew it was going to fail? And I believe we answered that sufficiently last week on Thursday, but it probably bore some additional explanation. So hopefully we've got that cleared up. Yeah, one, it was the fastest way to the floor. Two, it was the only thing that they could have done on Thursday because all they had scheduled for Thursday was a pro forma session. And they were, of course, out of session on Friday for Christmas Day. And as a matter of fact, had been out of session on Wednesday, not even a pro forma session being called on Wednesday. And then the pushback, as we explained to people, all right, if on Tuesday night, you hear from the president, all of a sudden he wants to insert himself in these so-called negotiations and advocate for a $2,000 check at the last minute after the bill has been passed when there's really nothing you can do about it. That was kind of a garbage approach to being a part of the negotiations to begin with. On Tuesday, you've done your job. You've passed the bill in the House, and you believe it's been passed in the Senate as well. It's on its way to the president's desk for signature, and he announces that he's going to blow the whole thing up. On Tuesday night, what options have you got for the soonest you can try anything that might even possibly work to bring up $2,000 checks? You have this extraordinary opportunity. What are you going to do with it? Well, on Wednesday, you're going to do nothing because the House is out of session. There were so many people on Twitter on Wednesday insisting, why don't you just bring this thing up for a vote today? And it's like, well, one of those things about being out of session is you can't vote. You can't just walk onto the House floor, even as Speaker of the House, and say, I now declare the House to be in session. The House is out of session pursuant to a resolution adopted by the whole body that says we're out of session from now until the pro forma thing, at least on Thursday, and maybe even longer than that, in order to do any real business. So, they were up against it, and that was the only thing that they could do. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. And, all right, so did everybody get where we were when we left off on this? I mean, we got cut short by our little break here. But, again, just to recap the situation, Tuesday night, the House has passed the omnibus bill with the $600 checks in it. Senate has passed it. It is on the way to the president to be signed or vetoed, as the case may be. And only at that point, those of you who remember your Schoolhouse Rock about how bills work, does the president know that it's a problem? At that point is when the president says, oh, I would like a different language in the bill. That was something that you should have spoken up about earlier before the House and Senate actually cast their votes. So you could, I suppose, pipe up in between the House passing it and the Senate passing it, and the Senate could then respond to it. And if they pass $2,000 checks at your behest, I mean, wouldn't happen with this president or with this Senate, but if it did under other circumstances, the Senate could pass a version of the bill with $2,000 checks in it, and you could bounce it back to the House pretty quickly and get the House's assent to it, probably even in good times on a voice vote. But if necessary, it'd take a couple hours. The House would agree to the Senate amendments, and then off it goes. Even without a conference on it, you just say, House, do you think that the Senate changes are good? Yes. And you think that the rest of the bill should stay the same? Yep. Okay. Well, now it matches. Send it to the White House. But instead, the president probably at least somewhat disingenuously says, I want it to be different, but it's kind of too late for that. However, the House leadership says that's a great idea. We don't really know why you stumbled onto it the way you did, but okay, I'm for $2,000 checks. If you're willing to, say out loud that you are too, we will use that to, leverage Republicans in the Senate to agree. The only question is, how can we do it and when can we do it? It's Tuesday night. After the bill has passed, we sent everybody home. And there was a lot of complaints. Well, why did you send everybody home? Didn't you know that there are people suffering out there? Yes, they did. And so they did the best they could for them. We would rather have had larger checks, but $600 was what we were able to get passed in the House so that the Senate could act. We were assured that the Senate would act and they would agree to the $600, which is better than $0. And so, fine, let it go and see if we can get $600 out the door. And if lightning strikes, if there's a black swan event, if the president who, represents the party that wanted $0 to go out suddenly decides to call on everybody, including his party, to approve of $2,000 going out the door, then we'll jump on it. And so they did, but only after sending everybody home for a couple of days. So the business, I don't know when they voted on the resolution that did it. Could have been immediately after finishing up the bill. Sometimes if you have a pretty good sense of whether or not your bill is going to pass and pass the Senate, you can pass your adjournment resolution beforehand, or you can even make your adjournment resolution contingent on successful passage, so that on Monday you can pass a resolution that says, okay, pending the Tuesday vote on the omnibus bill, and if and only if the omnibus bill passes both the House and the Senate in a form that can be sent to the president for signature, and you can do it in much more elegant language, and you can refer to other parts of the process. For instance, if we get to the point that an enrolled bill has been sent to the White House for signature, then we will adjourn for a couple of days. It is Tuesday. Friday is Christmas. How do you do these things, right? You say, well, we'll come back for actual business on what date? You set that ahead of time. And I think they picked Tuesday the 29th for the next actual session. Well, no, I guess today, if they're going to even have their vote on the suspensions. But at any rate, they picked the next date for a meeting, and ordinarily they probably would pick a Tuesday. But today they picked them, or this time they picked the Monday because they're running out of time. It's the end of the year, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, they were at that point anticipating the veto, correctly, of the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA. So they were getting ready to come back on Monday anyway. So, that too. Well, why are you leaving when this isn't absolutely done and signed by the president? This president who you distrust to sign everything properly, shouldn't you hang around and wait? You should, but if it's Christmas, you're going to have a lot of pressure from members that let us go home for Christmas. Besides which, we'll be back for the NDAA veto override the next Monday anyway, so what's the big deal? So, you pass a resolution that says, all right, we'll come back for business next week. In the meantime, we'll have one pro forma session on Thursday. That, you might remember from previous discussions, is a practice of the House and Senate when they're adjourning for a couple of days in a row. They're going to take a 3, 4, 6, 10-day break. They have a couple of pro forma sessions in there. That's just to establish the fact that the Congress is still in session and they haven't dissolved. They haven't adjourned, sine die. They haven't adjourned for long enough for the president to make a claim under the Vacancies Act or under the, the Recess Appointments Clause to say, well, Congress isn't around. I couldn't send this nomination for consideration quickly enough, and I have an emergency basis. I've appointed somebody to the Supreme Court or as Secretary of Agriculture or what have you. Common practice now, no matter who's running Congress, to schedule these pro forma sessions to defeat the possible claim of an adjournment of long enough that the courts would recognize a valid recess appointment power in that time. So, when on Tuesday night you discover that there's this opportunity to bring up $2,000 checks as a freestanding bill or as an amendment or what have you, in this case as a freestanding bill amending the omnibus bill, the first chance you get to actually do something is Thursday, only you're in pro forma session and everybody has gone home for the weekend. Now, they can do remote voting these days because of the COVID thing. But even so, it's a pro forma session. And there's another wrinkle to it if you really want to get down super low in the weeds for this. And here you might be able to find reason to criticize possibly criticize Democrats for this, if you're really looking for that. But on Thursday, the best you could do, because there were no members there, and you asked for unanimous consent. If you had instead tried to schedule an actual vote, you just try and force past the fact that everybody's been sent home, somebody could object that there's no quorum present and you can't have a valid vote, and you wouldn't really be able to get past that. Even with remote voting, I don't know whether you could get people, alerted to that for a Thursday morning. This is a Thursday morning, still early in the day, but it is, in fact, Christmas Eve, and people are probably busy, especially if you've told them they're going to have a break. Maybe with remote voting, but under normal circumstances, no. On Thursday, you can't get people back in place in time to hold a roll call vote on this thing. And besides which, you have no idea who, if you've tried to force everybody to come back, you have no idea who would make it back. You wouldn't know whether you had brought back more Republicans than Democrats until they got there and you counted them all up. And then some people have flown in from all over the place, and you end up having to postpone the vote anyway because, well, for whatever reason, 90 Republicans decided to fly back for this vote and only 80 Democrats flew back for it. I can establish a quorum now, but I can't win the vote. So you don't want to do that either because you'll look ridiculous. So all you can do is you ask unanimous consent. And yes, one single Republican can blow it up. And sure, everyone anticipated that they would, and they did. But that doesn't mean it was, that it's somehow insincere. It's just that's the first time you could do anything, and that was the only thing available to you. The next opportunity to actually hold a vote, as it turns out, would be today, Monday. So you either could have said, throw up your hands and say, there's nothing I can do. We can't have a vote until Monday, at which point everybody says Monday is too late. Especially if he doesn't sign the thing and unemployment benefits expire, et cetera, et cetera. We could have a government shutdown in the meantime if you can't get the voting done in time on Monday. Lots of problems with waiting until Monday, but that's all you can do. So they did it. But still not good enough for many people. And if you wanted to find that nitpick, by the way, for the unanimous consent request, if you actually watch the proceedings, and I don't know, I was going to say I don't recommend it because, it was pretty boring. But if you really want to get down in the weeds and see it in action, it was worth doing because it would have perhaps puzzled you what happened there. Steny Hoyer was running things on the floor for the Democrats. That's his ordinary day-to-day job. He is majority leader, and one of the real conveniences of having a majority leader from Maryland is that he can, in fact, stick around to run things during a pro forma session near to the Christmas break. Great, because he can drive home later on. So he can stay around to take care of business and still make it home for Christmas with his family, and that's what he did. So he made the unanimous consent request. Hey, can we, I ask unanimous consent that we take up the bill and that has $2,000 in it. They had to use a freestanding bill, and in order to have it, it was already written too. And he says, all right, I ask unanimous consent to discharge the committees of jurisdiction. It was the Budget Committee had it, and the Ways and Means Committee had it. Discharge these committees from any further consideration of the bill and immediately bring it to the floor for consideration. And I ask unanimous consent that it be considered as passed. And you knew that there would be a Republican objection, but maybe you noticed during the show, I think we got notes from, did Matthew Rigdon pass this on? He was saying that over at Daily Kos, yeah, there we are. Joan was saying over at Daily Kos that it was Kevin McCarthy who took credit for stopping the unanimous consent request. And he may have done that in a press conference at some point. But then a further note that said, well, it turns out now that Rob Whitman gets the credit for stopping the $2,000 payments. Rob Whitman was the floor representative for the Republicans on that Thursday. So everybody figured, just from watching these accounts, oh, well, and it must have been Rob Whitman on the floor who says, I object, right? Steny Hoyer says, I ask unanimous consent to blah, 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 effectively pass the bill. And ordinarily the person in the chair with the gavel. This would have been done in the House, so you'd be the Speaker pro tempore, but so they addressed them as Madam Speaker because it was Debbie Dingell from Michigan who was presiding. And ordinarily she would then say, well, is there objection? And then Whitman, on behalf of Republicans, he might give a little speech, he might not, but essentially he says, I object. And objection is heard. And that's sort of the end of it. That's the way a normal unanimous consent request would go. And there might be some negotiations afterwards. If the guy who made the request actually thought he was going to get to yes, he might negotiate in order to assuage the doubts of the Republican on the floor, but not in this case. Anyway, but that didn't happen either. Here's what happened. Steny Hoyer makes this unanimous consent request, and Dingell reads a little script that she's been handed by the parliamentarian and says, essentially, under a longstanding practice of speakers of both parties, she says the chair is constrained, or maybe it's the speaker because they're in the House. Forget it. The point is, she says the speaker is constrained from entertaining unanimous consent requests during a pro forma session unless it has been agreed to by the bipartisan floor leadership in advance, essentially is what she's saying. In other words, the whole explanation that I gave you, which was that the only thing that Pelosi and the Democrats could have done once they found out on Tuesday night that Trump had these alleged objections to the size of the checks, the only thing they could have done was wait for the next next session, pro forma or otherwise, and ask unanimous consent that this freestanding bill with $2,000 checks authorized in it be passed immediately by unanimous consent. It turns out that even that wasn't really allowed. So I guess I was going to say you could blame Democrats for it, but the way you would have to come around to blaming them for it would be to say they should have known that it wouldn't even get to the point where Republicans have to object because under agreement between the parties, unanimous consent requests are essentially out of order during pro forma sessions, so that wasn't even going to get to the point where Republicans have to object. And, but then it would take some real gymnastics to say, so that's the Democrats' fault, as opposed to, well, all that really means is then the truth is that the earliest they could have done anything about it is Monday, and that's when they're going to do something about it, so what's your problem? In addition to which, of course, there is the possibility that if you had had some discussions ahead of time, you could have asked for, off the floor somewhere, agreement from the Republican leadership. And they didn't. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't get it. In which case, it's definitely not their fault. So it's a pretty weak case that you would be able to make against the Democrats. You see what happened here, though? Under the ordinary agreement, there are no consent requests entertained during a pro forma session. Essentially, it's so that you don't surprise one another with stupid things, although, that's why you leave people behind. At least one designated Republican and one designated Democrat are on the floor to object to things in case somebody tries to surprise you. But for convenience's sake, the parties have generally agreed, we really shouldn't allow unanimous consent requests by surprise. But if something comes up and it's an emergency, if the leadership of both parties get together ahead of time and say, we agree that this is an emergency, and here's one that they should have agreed is an emergency, but Republicans are jerks and they don't agree it's an emergency. But under ordinary circumstances with non-crazy parties, they might have said, for the president to come out and call for this, if he were a non-crazy president, we might want to meet that demand on short notice, in which case I will give you my agreement to ask for unanimous consent on the floor during the pro forma session, and in all likelihood, no one's going to show up to object, so let's do it. That would have worked just fine. But surely the Democrats, including Nancy Pelosi, who said we're going to ask for unanimous consent on Thursday, knew that the real rule was that the chair is ordinarily constrained from entertaining these requests. Now, I should also say it's not prohibited from entertaining the request, just constrained out of a sense of comity and propriety, which maybe is misplaced in these Republicans, but it is a long-standing practice. I wouldn't put it on Debbie Dingell to just wing it and freelance it and say to hell with it. It is my discretion, and I'm going to exercise it, because that would have really upset the balance the balance of whatever understanding there is between the two parties, at least in terms of being able to anticipate that there will be no wild card unanimous consent requests made during a pro forma session. But, not really a big deal. But at any rate, it was never going to fail or never going to pass, and everybody knew that. Then I guess if you were really looking to blame the Democrats, well, you should have known that that unanimous consent request isn't even in order on Thursday. You could say, well, but even without asking Debbie Dingell to go out of her way and decide to exercise her discretion to allow a unanimous consent request to go forward, only to then see Rob Whitman go on record as saying no, and it's not even on record. I guess he would just speak out and it would say objection was heard. That's all it would say in the record. But I guess Democrats could have asked for Republican consent ahead of time to bring this thing to the floor. And if they didn't get it, then it would still be, well, the Republicans still do say, and that's, I guess, what actually did happen, because there was no notice to the chair that an agreement had been reached between the parties before posing the unanimous consent request. The chair opted to exercise the discretion not to entertain the request because the chair hadn't heard anything about an agreement between the parties, which means that there was no agreement between the parties, which means there was disagreement between the parties, which means the other party, the Republicans, did in fact object to bringing this unanimous consent request ahead and forward and agreeing to it. So there really was materially I guess if you went to law school, you could call it like a constructive objection to the unanimous consent request. The unanimous consent request was made. The objection wasn't made out loud on the floor, but the unanimous consent request was blocked by the chair because the chair hadn't heard earlier that the Republicans were okay with this thing. So it eventually goes down because Republicans won't give their okay to it, even though no Republican had to say the words, "I object," on the floor. How do you like that for a weedy explanation? You will never get that anywhere else. On the radio, in the newspaper, in a newsletter, on a Substack. I don't care what you do. There's nobody's going to give that to you. Unfortunately, there is good reason for not doing that. It is a total waste of most people's time and boring as hell. So that's why no one will ever explain it to you. But don't you feel smarter for having? A lot of you will probably feel like you lost IQ points in that one, but you didn't. You gained them. And what can I tell you? I felt like explaining that to you. And this show is as much therapy for me in that respect as anything else. I was going to say, if you hadn't heard it, my family would have had to have heard it. But guess what? My family just heard it. And now, see, it's just like this unanimous consent request thing. I said they weren't going to hear it, but they did hear it. They said they were going to ask unanimous consent, but they didn't have to get an objection. But that was because they gave their objection privately. It's a very weird situation. All right. So now we have their ability to bring up the suspension of the rules consideration of this thing. And I guess here the most important thing to remember is that later on today, if they bring it up and they don't get a 2/3 vote, there will be people on Twitter saying, see, again, I knew that Nancy Pelosi was personally opposed to this thing, and she's a neoliberal shill and something, and she did this in order to screw things up, and how dare they, and now it's been defeated, and now nobody's going to get those checks. The thing to remember here is that this isn't necessarily the end of the line either. Under the normal rules, this is interesting, rules surrounding the suspension of the rules. And I know when we brought this up last week, people thought that was ludicrous too. Even David Dan, couldn't resist taking a swipe at that one, but lots of people did. It sounds goofy, but it's not really, it doesn't make any sense to think of it as goofy. Of course, there are rules surrounding the suspension of the rules. If there weren't, then people would just walk up to the floor and say, hey, I suspend the rules, and I guess what? I just passed this bill that nobody voted for. No, there are rules about how you suspend the rules. Oh, that sounds so stupid. Rules and suspending the rules, it doesn't make any sense. It does make sense. How do you know when you've suspended the rules? How many votes does it take to pass something when you suspend the rules? 2/3, right? Well, how do you know that if there's no rules because you're suspending the rule? You see how this degenerates very quickly. I know it sounds funny, but it makes a lot of sense. You couldn't operate without it. Anyway, so they'll have their vote on suspending the rules. And again, if it fails, that doesn't mean the bill is over with. It really never does, quite honestly. But I guess if you fail under regular order, you can always reconsider the bill at some later date. They just very rarely do because there are so many other bills pressing for attention on the House floor or the Senate floor for that matter, that they don't tend to go back unless it's super important, absolutely country can't operate without it sort of a bill. You might argue that this is one of them. Anyway, a suspension bill is brought to the floor kind of with the assumption that, yeah, you're taking this risk of requiring a 2/3 vote. And sometimes if you don't count very accurately or some other weird anomaly comes up, you might make things more difficult than you need to for a bill that really should pass. So if a bill fails to get 2/3 under suspension of the rules, it is absolutely possible and frequently would happen if you actually failed with a bill of importance. They'll just send that to the Rules Committee, and the Rules Committee will report out a new special rule for it, and you'll consider it again if necessary, as the next day. So defeating it today under suspension of the rules is not the end of it. And anybody who tells you, oh, it was so foolish to do this, I mean, I don't love the practice because it would be, I guess the shortest distance, not the least amount of time, because you'd have to wait until perhaps later in the week to bring something under regular order, but the lowest hurdle to getting the thing passed and then the pressure put on the Senate is to pass it under regular order so that just a bare majority will work. But in order to get a vote on it today, you got to go with the suspension of the rules. So they did it, or they will do it, and even if it fails, they can bring it back tomorrow or even Wednesday and get another vote. That doesn't necessarily mean the end of it. When it gets to the Senate, that might mean the end of it. That might be the death of it, but then that would be on Republicans again. So it's not a total disaster, even if it doesn't pass under suspension of the rules. It's not necessarily any sort of a sign that Nancy Pelosi is evil and doesn't want the thing passed. There's still another path through. All right. I think that probably wraps it up on suspension of the rules. Let's see. Oh, I mentioned to you that there was a thread that I wanted to share with you that'll give you some context for what's going on with Trump and his, let's say, weird negotiating style. The fact that he held up the bill for days and made insistence that there was some major change that he wanted. He still claims that there are major changes that he wanted, but then ended up folding, as Greg said, like a cheap card table, and I don't even know how much those cost. Why would he do something like this? Why hold up the bill? Why disenroll people from unemployment insurance? And just to be mean? Maybe he might do that. But there's something else at work here. He doesn't know what he's doing. There was a thread here from David Miller, who is apparently a tax lawyer who has some experience working with Donald Trump in the past. And he, on December 23rd, says he will sign. He says he's going to sign this bill. He keeps threatening to veto it, but he's going to sign it. How do I know this? And this is the story. It begins in 1998, while I was the tax lawyer representing Conseco in a joint venture with the Trump organization to buy the General Motors building. I don't remember this thing happening in 1998. Maybe you do. Not Jose Canseco, the conglomerate. So they're going to buy the General Motors building for some unknown reason, along with the Trump organization. Why partner with them, I have no idea. Check out the deal. Conseco put up 99.9% of the capital. Trump puts up 0.1% of the capital. He then goes on to say that Lehman Brothers loaned the rest, and I don't know what the rest would be, because 99.9% plus 0.1% is 100%. You got me. Anyway, you know what? As a matter of fact, we're probably going to run out of time before this break, and I'll just tease it this way. So that's the setup, and I gotta read this thing to you uninterrupted, and we're a little bit behind in the music too. So we'll jump out when we come back. The last segment will reveal all in the first minute or two as to why Trump did this stupid thing over the weekend. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. I'm going to put this thing aside for later. It's actually something that I might have, been able to tweet out during a longer break to help explain this to Jake Sherman, whose piece Greg shared with us, and so that brings us around again full circle. Why is it that this thing would happen, as Jake Sherman had put it here? What a bizarre, embarrassing episode for the president. He opposed a bill his administration negotiated. He had no discernible strategy and no hand to play, and it showed. He folded and got nothing besides a few days of attention and chaos. Why would this happen? He goes on. It's quite at some length here. He goes on to say, zip, zero, zilch. If he was going to give up this easy, he should have just kept quiet and signed the bill. It would have been less embarrassing. And then I guess we might as well continue with this one because this sets up a later discussion. Greg mentioned it. In a statement, Trump said Congress will review Section 230, the statute governing social media companies. And there's a question mark on that one. Pretty sure they've been reviewing it for a while. And a redlined bill, huh? Okay, and let's see. Redlined bill, he'll never get the rescissions he's asking for, zero chance. Right, you heard, actually, Greg did read this thing. So once again, now that that's set up, back over here to David Miller, the tax attorney who was involved in the 1998 transaction, apparently everyone forgot about, in which Canseco, not Jose Canseco, although, we did have that come up as a possibility. Brian Monroe was saying, well, is it possible that Trump accidentally tried to buy Jose Canseco? He did, in fact, try to buy Greenland, right? So maybe it's not so crazy to buy Jose Canseco. But no, that's not what it was. Canseco is going to buy the General Motors building. And if they've got 99.9% of the capital and Lehman Brothers is willing to make a loan, I'd love to have the background on this one. Maybe I'll ask him. See what happens. Why bring in a troublemaking idiot like Trump at all for 0.1% of the capital? I do not know, but they do it. They do it. So that's the situation, right? Canseco putting up 99.9% of the capital. Trump puts up 0.1% of the capital. Lehman Brothers somehow involves himself in the 0% that's left. I don't know. The joint venture agreement was very straightforward, David explains. Income and deductions were based on capital contributions. Everything was agreed to quickly by the lawyers. And, I didn't even really think about how we were getting around to this income and deductions. But, you buy this property, General Motors building, presumably because you're going to make money with it. How much money are you going to make? I don't know. But what's going to happen to the money? Presumably, you don't have to be a lawyer to answer this one. Conseco puts up 99.9% of the capital. Trump puts up 0.1% of the capital. $100 comes in, right? What happens? $99.90 goes to Conseco and 10 cents goes to Trump, right? At Lehman Brothers, I don't know what the hell they're doing in this, but I don't know. They must have some special agreement. Okay. So that's pretty basic, right? You put up 99.9% of the capital, you get 99% of the income. And likewise, hadn't thought about this, but real estate people know what they're doing, think about this stuff all the time. Deductions, right? Comes time to do your taxes. There's depreciation and other various deductions that can go along with the ownership of the General Motors building. Presumably lots of complicated ones that you and I don't know about. But they have a dollar value. How much can you deduct on your taxes? The answer is Conseco can take 99.9% of whatever the hell you're entitled to deduction-wise on their taxes, and the Trump organization can take 0.1% of the total deductions to which the owners of the building are entitled and do that, right? Simple. So that's why everything was agreed to quickly by the lawyers, except no one knows why Lehman Brothers are there. But all right. Maybe they provided the private jet and the bagels at the meeting. However, on the day before signing, this is the key part. All this is before this is just set up. The day before the signing, we were told that Mr. Trump himself, would be arriving at 10 p.m. at our offices, at which point I'd say, I'm closed, come back tomorrow. But he's Mr. Trump, he's very important. He's 0.1% of this deal. Fine. They entertain. In 1998, people are still willing to entertain the intervention of idiot Trump. He's arriving at the offices at 10 p.m. Why? To negotiate the deal, which, as we have just said, has already been negotiated. It's 99.9% for you, 1.1% for you, Lehman Brothers standing by. Everybody knows where the money goes. Everybody knows where the deductions go. But Mr. Trump is coming at 10 p.m. to negotiate this thing. Whatever. So there it is. He arrives with an entourage, of course. A podium has been set up for him at the front of a long table in a conference room. Again, they're having a meeting. They got a conference table in a conference room. He's not content to just sit down with everybody and negotiate the deal. He's got to have a podium. I'm lecturing you. Mr. 0.1% of the capital is going to talk to 99.9% of the capital and tell you what's what. Give me a podium. Fine, idiot, here's a podium. So he comes in, he strolls in with the entourage, 10 o'clock at night, and says, I don't know what. He says, Miller says he asks for some minor corporate changes. He's redlined this thing now. I'm going to make some changes. But he then demands that he get all of the depreciation deductions. And you know, now we know from the New York Times reporting and other things, like his whole game was collecting as many income tax deductions as he could so that he would pay zero taxes, and he'd manipulate anything to get into that. He walks in 0.1% of the capital and tells 99.9% of the capital, I get 100% of the deductions, which I guess maybe, I don't know whether you can assign. Later on, we find out that no, you can't just do that, I guess. They could have come up with some other agreement, but they didn't. He demands he gets all the depreciation deductions. Having negotiated, this is what he came to do. He puts on his coat and leaves. He walks in at 10 p.m. Give me a podium. All right, here's the deal. The thing you negotiated is null and void unless I get all of the deductions, even though I put up 0.1% of the money. Thank you. That is my negotiation. Puts on his coat and he's out the door. All the lawyers look at each other. The general counsel of Conseco said, well, we put up 99.9% of the money. We get 99.9% of the depreciation deductions. Trump's lawyers, what do they say to this? Well, Trump has put on his coat and left. So Trump's lawyers say, don't worry, he'll sign. Okay. David Miller says, I go home to get some sleep. The next morning, my corporate partner and Trump's corporate lawyer take the joint venture agreement to Trump Tower for Trump's signature. I'm in my office. The phone rings. It's my corporate partner. Mr. Trump wants to speak to you. All right. Yes, Mr. Trump, I say. And Trump says, were you there last night? He asks. Yes, Mr. Trump, I was. Did you hear me last night? He asks. Yes, Mr. Trump, I did, I reply. So, does this agreement that I have in front of me here, they're asking me to sign this, does this agreement give me the depreciation deductions? He asks. Miller says, no, Mr. Trump, it does not. He's angry now. You were there last night. You heard me. And this agreement does not give me the depreciation deductions. Why not? Now, Miller says, I know that the agreement could have been structured for Trump to get some depreciation deductions if he was willing to provide a, quote, bottom guarantee. I don't know what that is. It sounds a little weird. Take that for whatever you want, but I don't know. It sounds like a term of art that could have, if they had negotiated ahead of time, acceptably allowed him to take more deductions than he would ordinarily be entitled to based on the share of the capital that he put up. But it wasn't. They didn't do that. So, Miller says, I answered truthfully, Mr. Trump, the law does not permit you to get depreciation deductions. He's furious now. The law does not permit me to get depreciation deductions. That's right, Mr. Trump. At which point he slams down the phone and signs the agreement because there's not a thing he can do about it otherwise, or it's a walk away from the whole deal. But presumably you want this deal for whatever reason. So he shuts up and he signs it. So David Miller knew on December 23rd that he was going to sign this thing despite his protestations to the contrary. And that the reason, and the supposedly face-saving way out of it was he would insist that he was conducting negotiations. So what's going on over here? What's the answer to Jake Sherman? Why would he do this? Why would he hold out? And the answer is, that's the way he conducts negotiations. Mr. Great Deals, Mr. Businessman. It's called the art of the deal. And he has to look like he's negotiating. His version of negotiating is, I come when I want to. I make you get and go into the office at 10 p.m. because that's what I want. I'm going to go out of my way to make it be inconvenient for you. I want a podium. And in he comes. There's my negotiations. Give me all the money. Bye. Coat on, out the door. And when it comes to serious business people, they say, no, we're not going to give you all the money. In politics, where it's all about kowtowing, there's a whole party that says, yes, Mr. President, whatever you want, as stupid as it could possibly be, we're going to do it. We're all going to do it. This is the way he works. And this is how he folds. And this is how to make him fold. You put him in a corner. You bind him legally where there's nothing he can do about it. And then he slams down the phone and walks away and then says, who knows what kind of press conference he had after this. He might very well have had a press conference saying, I won. I got all the depreciations. No, you didn't. But we're willing to let you say so because we know we're going to pocket the depreciation according to the legal agreement here. So say whatever you want. We're keeping all the money. Same thing over here. Now he's sent a redlined bill and says they're going to get rid of Section 230. So last night, one of the White House press secretaries was responsible for putting out the statements after the news broke that he allegedly signed this thing, which we've never seen, which is very interesting too. Ordinarily, what does he do when he signs something? Even a meaningless little proclamation, he holds it up, right? And he shows the cameras. He loves having signing ceremonies. Nothing he's done more frequently in his term of office than have fake signing ceremonies, except possibly golf. Nothing like official looking that he's done more frequently. And he's somehow passed up the opportunity to do this with this thing. No one saw him sign it. That's very odd and very weird. He probably did sign it, and like I said, I'm willing to agree that he has for legal purposes. But it's odd that he didn't show it to anybody, and I guess this is because that's the sign that he knows he was defeated, is he decided not to have a photo op for this one because everybody knew, or the word was already on the street that he had caved, and he didn't want that documented by photographers for whatever reason. So anyway, one of the doofus press people from the White House attempted to put out an explainer about how he actually won on this thing. And Judd Deere was the one who did it. And there's a whole thread, and may or may not be worth discussing all of it. But anyway, yeah, here he is. So, so he signs it, and now Deere claims on Trump's behalf that one, it was because he signed it because they're going to go back and change it to $2,000 checks, which they may or may not do. But in addition, he doesn't want to just say it's about the $2,000 checks, because that could be good for Democrats and possibly bad for Republicans as well. So he makes these other claims. Oh, the Congress has agreed. Here it is. Additionally, Congress has promised that Section 230, which so unfairly benefits big tech at the expense of the American people, will be reviewed and either be terminated or substantially reformed. Likewise, the House and Senate have agreed to focus strongly on the very substantial voter fraud which took place in the November 3rd presidential election. That tweet, by the way, from Judd Deere gets tagged with the Twitter, "This claim about election fraud is disputed" flag. Still not strong enough, but there it is. Then he goes on to say, the Senate will start the process for a vote that increases checks to $2,000, repeals Section 230, and starts an investigation into voter fraud. And then, quoting Trump, he says, "Much more money is coming. I will never give up my fight for the American people." Well, of course, it's garbage all around. One, no, the House and Senate have not agreed to focus strongly or otherwise on the fake claims of very substantial voter fraud, which didn't take place, of course, in this country on the November 3rd presidential election. No, the Senate will not be the one starting the process for a vote that increases checks to $2,000. The House is, but he says the Senate is doing it so that he can claim it's Republican work, and that Loeffler and which I think is pronounced maybe Leffler, possibly. I think I saw at least Ivanka Trump pronouncing it that way over the weekend in some Twitter video, but she's kind of dumb, so maybe it's not. I don't know. Anyway, no, they're not doing any of these things. The rescissions that he is asking for, that is something that the president can do in the absence of a line item veto. He was wishing for a line item veto in this. He doesn't have it. Somebody told him. That's true and correct. And so what you do is you ask for rescissions, and the Congress can put together a rescissions bill to remove what they say is wasteful spending from these things, but they're not going to do it because it's a negotiated thing, for one thing, and he's asking to repeal his entire budget, which is just stupid. So probably not. Plus, of course, there's no time left anyway. They'd never get through a rescissions process before this Congress dissolves. Yes, the 117th Congress can pass a rescissions bill of the 116th Congress's omnibus bill if they were inclined to do so, but they're not, and the president can't force him to vote on it, and in a couple days he won't be president anyway. So that's not happening. That was all face-saving garbage. Section 230 is something he's been railing about for the last couple of weeks. That too, face-saving garbage. Nobody's got any time to deal with that. $2,000 checks he even put in there backwards. The Senate isn't initiating that. The House is, and whatever. So, the whole thing is garbage. And then, of course, the claim that the House and Senate have agreed to focus on a voter fraud investigation. The Senate might, who knows? But they've got 10 seconds to do it before the Congress dissolves. The House is not interested at all. That was just made up. But if you're just going to, make up stuff like that, I guess you could make up the signing of the bill too, right? If you're going to lie that blatantly about what the supposed agreement is, then you better show me the signature on this thing or something. I don't know. If it was a bill more detrimental to the health of the United States, I'd say show me the signature, because I'm not going to enforce it until I see it. But here, circumstances being what they are, fine. Start the $600 checks rolling, and we'll get back to you. Anyway, it was just very weird, and it was face-saving garbage, and it was just it's the equivalent of Trump showing up, grabbing a podium, saying stuff, and putting his coat on and leaving, and everybody says, well, that didn't mean anything, and then that's the end of it. So I think that's kind of where we stand. Well, I think that wraps it up and gives good context to it. I think that David Miller thread is super important for understanding the context to it, and I'm going to share it maybe later on with Jake Sherman. I don't know if he'll take any notice of it, but he should. It answers a lot of questions. All right, let's see. Other things that we can cram in here before we wind things up for the day. Gosh, there's a lot. I guess by way of update, there is a New York Times article that I saw over the weekend. I search for these things every once in a while. Since I update everybody nightly on how many people have died in this country waiting for Trump to deliver on his promise of free Regeneron for all who need it. And we're up over, well, I guess we're coming up on 125,000 people who have died since then. If you can't believe how quickly we got to that number, you can reassure yourself of the accuracy of it by noting the articles that I saw printed over the weekend, noting that December was the deadliest month of the pandemic so far. So I guess in case you thought things really were slowing down, I mean, they may slow down in the future, but if you thought we were already at the tail end of this thing, minus, without even administering the vaccine, no. And a lot of that might have to do with the way people traveled and gathered for Thanksgiving. But yeah, by far the deadliest month, December, and that's how we came to get over 120,000 people dead between early October and now. But anyway, I check every once in a while, is anybody getting this Regeneron stuff? And it turns out that there are some people getting it. It's sort of trickling out, although I think they may have created that strange, weird distribution problem for themselves that might be analogous to the problems Greg told us about with the Tamiflu. But the New York Times does have some information in case you are in this terrible position of having a new COVID diagnosis and are wondering, can I get my hands on the supposed miracle drug? Well, you never know. He's probably lying about exactly how well it works for, or exaggerating the effects for everybody. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's a good idea. Get a hold of it if you can. Can you? New York Times has an article, What to Know About the COVID Antibody Drugs That Could Help Many. Here's information about who these therapies can help, how much they cost, and how to find out if you can get them where you live. That seems like pretty important information. So I thought I would share with you. And it does push back a little bit on the idea that he's giving it to no one. But there are some people getting it. 2 new antibody treatments have shown promise in keeping high-risk COVID-19 patients out of the hospital. There's, of course, Regeneron, and there's an Eli Lilly equivalent out there as well. It likewise has a unpronounceable name. But it's in here, and you can look it up. And basically, you should use this as a guide if you or someone you know is early in the contraction of the disease, not yet hospitalized, hopefully, and maybe still time to turn things around and lessen the severity of the disease. Yes, there are resources here. The New York Times article will tell you where to go and whether the treatments are likely to be of help for you and how to get your hands on it. But it also outlines the fact that there are lots of doses being produced, not as many as they want, but for some reason, not that many actually delivered to people. The drug companies, apparently, federal government bought 950,000 doses from Eli Lilly and 300,000 doses from Regeneron. The 2 companies have already delivered, they say, hundreds of thousands of those doses. But just like with the vaccine, it's a little difficult to say how many people have actually gotten this stuff. The federal government has on hand almost 532,000 doses of the drug. Nearly 291,000 doses have been shipped out, which means that, 300-something thousand doses are sitting somewhere, again, for some reason. The subset of hospitals reporting data to the government on the number of administered doses has used only 20% of their supply on average. So there should be plenty out there to get. It's just that also means that not very many people have actually gotten this stuff. But some people have. But yet, 120-something thousand have died, maybe with hope in their thoughts of being saved by some sort of miracle, only to not be saved at all. And, Trump really should be held to account for the depravity of that particular lie. It was foolish of him to do, if not worse than foolish. And, gosh, that's bad news. All right, let's see. Let's throw in 1 or 2 other items before we finish. We'll have to do this another day. But here's a little interesting twist from the Hill. A provocative headline, but I think the body of the piece actually less provocative and more accurate. Let's see if this gets your hackles up here. The headline is, COVID-19 could complicate Pelosi's path to Speaker next year. This is a popular topic especially among the most radically progressive wing of our listenership. The idea, does this cross over and cross-pollinate with the idea of forcing a vote on Medicare for all or any other of the ideas that they'd like to get to in exchange for progressives and newly elected members of all stripes supporting Pelosi for Speaker? We've discussed that play and how it might work out, but the provocative title makes you think, oh gosh, now what? But there really is something to it. It's just not exactly what you think. As Speaker, Nancy Pelosi seeks the support to keep the gavel for another term. Her allies are keeping close watch on a potential wild card that could complicate her path next month. COVID-19. Yeah, so it's not, COVID-19 is kind of part of the argument behind forcing a vote on Medicare for all. See, in the middle of a pandemic, no one would dare vote against it. That's sort of the play that they're hoping for. That's not what this is about. Pelosi already facing a much slimmer majority in the next Congress, of course, after Democrats were clobbered at the polls in November. Not that badly, thank you. Meaning she can afford far fewer Democratic defections than the 15 who opposed her 2 years ago. True. Lawmakers must be present on the House floor, this is the twist, to cast their vote for Speaker, precluding the option for members to vote remotely, as many have done throughout the pandemic, right? I told you earlier, we do have new rules about allowing people to vote remotely, which would be fine ordinarily. But here, the COVID-19 complication is, members are going to have to come to D.C. and stand in the House chamber in order to cast their votes for Speaker and get business moving in the House, and that's going to worry a lot of them. They'll all be masked, of course. There's lots of talk about that already. Why not, though? Why do they all have to be there? I thought we could vote remotely. Well, remember what we're doing on January 3rd. We're dissolving the old Congress and swearing in the new Congress and then voting for Speaker. What happens to the rules of the 116th Congress, including the new rule that says you can vote remotely due to COVID? It's gone. Could it be adopted again? Will it be adopted again by the 117th Congress? Yes, sure. But it hasn't been at that moment on January 3rd. And the Constitution requires that everybody be there and cast those votes for Speaker in the House chamber on January 3rd until they come up with rules, which it is their prerogative constitutionally to pass, that say otherwise. They're going to have to go there and vote for a Speaker who can then coordinate a vote on the rules, which means that they can then pass a new rule for the 117th Congress that says you're allowed to vote remotely, but you got to do that in person. So, the combination of these factors creates the chance that Democrats could face a dilemma on January 3rd in which Pelosi locks up the Democratic support to remain Speaker, but coronavirus concerns, illnesses, quarantines, or otherwise, could prevent a sufficient number of them from being in the Capitol to log their votes. Maybe. It's a long shot, but maybe. A failure of Pelosi, by Pelosi, I guess, to secure support from half the voting members would, at the very least, throw the process into chaos. In the Democrats' nightmare scenario, the math could tilt so far in the Republicans' favor that it yields a Republican Speaker. Now, I don't know, but it's true. Let's say, just theoretically, we had 6 or 8 people out with COVID and the Republicans have none. They probably could elect McCarthy, says Representative John Yarmouth of Kentucky, referring to, of course, the House Republican leader. Lawmakers were reminded of their vulnerability this week when 5 more members of the House tested positive for COVID-19, bringing the total number of infected lawmakers to at least 35 since the pandemic hit the U.S. roughly a year ago, in case you've forgotten how long this has been going on. With that in mind, Pelosi's supporters say it's an outbreak over the holidays, not Democratic detractors, that poses the single greatest threat to Pelosi's otherwise expected speakership victory next month. So, very interesting. COVID, in fact, posing a greater threat than any mutiny. We're in a healthcare crisis, right? No one can get sick. That's the X factor here, said one House Democrat, a Pelosi ally, who spoke anonymously to discuss a sensitive topic. We need everyone to be healthy. That's the big fear. Some of those fears are being assuaged with the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine. To protect the continuity of government, House and Senate lawmakers now have the opportunity to receive a vaccination in the Capitol from the attending physician. Remember that guy? Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader McConnell were among the first to get their shots on Friday. And now, like I said, from a continuity of government perspective, when we were talking about this with Greg, it starts to make sense about letting people jump the line. Although maybe the smart thing to do, I don't know whether anybody would put up with it or not, but maybe the ones who should jump the line and then jump the line of line jumpers are the Democrats in the House who need to be on hand in person to vote for Pelosi for Speaker on January 3rd. If they get their shots now, there's some chance that some significant immunity could perhaps kick in by about that time, and any serious risk of spread among the members on January 3rd might be mitigated. So I hope they get to it. Maybe returning for voting on overriding the presidential veto and taking up the $2,000 check measure under suspension of the rules is the kick in the pants they need to show up and get those shots, or get them wherever they live, so they can be as safe as possible on January 3rd. I'll tell you what's coming up next after this.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, of course, what's coming up next is the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. He's got a lot on his plate for today. How about this one? This one jumps out at me. The Girl Scouts rebuke the Boy Scouts in an escalating recruitment war. I'd like to find out what that one's all about. Stay tuned for that and much more from around the country and around the world with Justice next.